Ever since we switched over to video-only journalism in January, our numbers have been going up in quite a bit. Now we're at about 3 million views per month, which may surprise a lot of people, but makes us one, if not the biggest independent news media in Canada, pretty close, and certainly the biggest energy independent news media. With that comes even more criticism than we have historically been taking. Now, look, I've been doing online journalism, independent journalism since, well, we started in 2008, so 17 years, and I've gotten a fairly thick skin as a result. But the more people who watch us, the more abuse and trolls we get on social media. And one of the complaints is, well, what makes you an expert? Why are you an expert? And they're mocking and they're trying to, it's an ad hominem attack. So, but let me respond to that, because there's a reason why you should watch and listen to Energi Media. What do we bring to the energy conversation globally and in Canada? Because there's an answer for that. Now, there's two parts to it. So the first one, in the broader sense, is how we approach energy and how we approach energy journalism. And it's very unique. Nobody else in Canada does this. What we do is we spend a lot of time interviewing global experts. We read global, we stay in touch with global trends. And we have a energy transition theory of change. And our theory of change tracks disruptive innovations in clean energy. So we're talking about wind and solar and batteries and EV and heat pumps and electrolyzers and so on. Those are kind of the big 5 or 6. And then there's all sorts of other related technologies like artificial intelligence and materials and so on that are connected and play into the global energy system. And so the global energy system is undeniably changing, and it's now accelerated since 2020. It was kind of an inflection point. And we track the changes at the global level, and then we take those observations and we apply them to primarily Canada, because that's our primary audience, and Alberta more than any other, because it is the 4th largest oil and gas or oil producer in the world. And what it does makes a difference. And but also the United States, about 20% of our viewers come from the US, and big changes happening there. And so we also track those changes, and to a lesser extent, what's happening in China and Europe and other places. And so what we do is we come away with observations about where the trends are going. And it might be where is global oil demand going. We read the various oil modeling studies from the OPEC to the IEA to S&P Global and Bloomberg NEF and so on. And then we can put it within the context of that bigger global energy transition. And I think those insights are very useful. And especially in Canada, because we are so insular. Trust me, when you get outside of Canada, the energy conversation is 100% different than it is inside Canada. And in Canada, and Alberta is the worst, but Canada, I think this generally applies, is we look at around us and we say, well, if it's not happening here, it's not happening anywhere else. And I can tell you, like in Alberta, where 4 or 5% of your new car sales are electric vehicles, you go to Norway, you go to Sweden, you go to China, you go to lots of markets, and it's far, far higher than that. So we bring a very useful perspective in applying global trends and saying, okay, now how does that affect Canada, United States, and so on? So that's the first thing. And as I say, we have an actual theory of change, and I've talked about this in other videos. You can track them down on our Energi Media YouTube channel. But here's the second thing. I spend a lot of time, and I mean hours and hours every day, and I read evidence. By that I mean, statistical analysis. The IEA is coming out with reports all the time. The various forecasting organizations like Bloomberg and so on are coming out with modeling. Regulators, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the Canadian Energy Regulator, on and on and on. All of that has to be reviewed and logged, and sort of goes into the old memory banks. So there's data, and on top of that, and there's a tremendous amount of data available if you go and look for it. And not all of the data agrees. We get it. That's grist for another conversation, but that's another part of the job. Okay, one agency says this data has this data, another one has this data. How do you reconcile those two? What difference does it make? That kind of thing. And then the third thing is I interview international energy experts. So out of the, probably 500 or 600 interviews I do in a year, it varies in a year, but generally around the 500 mark, give or take. And probably half or more of them will be from outside of Canada. There'll be a lot of from the United States, but also a number from Europe and some from Asia. And then occasionally we get into some of the emerging markets, like Latin America or Africa. Tie all that up, the evidence, the data, the expert interviews, tracking global trends, running it through our theory of change and coming up with observations. That's a very useful contribution to the Canadian, the national energy conversation, the energy conversation that's happening in Alberta. But that doesn't make us an expert. An expert is somebody like an economist with a PhD, somebody like Andrew Leach at the University of Alberta, or it could be an engineer who's an expert in some aspect of the Alberta oil and gas system. We have we're there very specific, we're very broad and focused. So we're like a mile wide and an inch deep, but in that mile wide and inch deep, we're making connections all the time and then, noting the trends and applying them in those areas where the experts maybe don't have anything useful to say. So that's why you should listen to global media, not because we're experts, but because we have expertise that we bring a different perspective to the energy conversation.